Hello, everyone. I'm Valora Washington, CEO of the CAYL Institute. I am delighted that you all have joined us once again, or maybe for the first time, to talk about critical issues of importance in the field of early childhood education and what's happening with young children and their families. Today, we're going to talk about the impact of the COVID era on ECE programs. That's what we're going to be discussing today. And it is always my pleasure to welcome you to these conversations. At the end of this 1 hour webinar, we will be posting a link that you can click if you want to interact with our speakers today. So please join us after this 1 hour webinar if you would like to do that. We're always thrilled that you're here. At the CAYL Institute, we've been working since 2003 to really create a community of early childhood education advocates. We really believe very strongly in the voice of the practitioners being a major element of the change that we must have in our field. And that's why our principles that we live every day are for representative leadership, a real strong commitment to diversity, being focused on solutions, being focused on impact, and making a difference by building and sharing knowledge. So, welcome and join us in this quest. One of the things that we've been focusing on this year is the whole theme of imagine, innovate, and impact. And previous webinars this year have focused on imagination and innovation. We were inspired by Albert Einstein, who said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Really something to think about. And so we started exploring with our imaginations what universal childcare might look like, what a 21st century kindergarten might look like, how states can best support our field. And in the past months, we've turned our attention to the idea of impact. What is happening and what impact is it having on our field? And how can we have an even stronger impact? And in thinking about this, we've been inspired by more of Einstein's words, this idea that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So we need innovative, fresh thinking. So, as we've turned our attention to impact, last month we had a very dynamic conversation on the impact of the COVID era on children, hosted by Sarah Gilliam. Today, we want to turn our attention to the impact of the COVID era on our programs. And to do this, we have a very dynamic panel who, from their diverse perspectives, are going to share with us what is known and what is experienced about this impact on programs. So, our three panelists are Bibi Otero, Sharon Scott Chandler, and Ardith Wiworka. Let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Bibi serves as special assistant to the Montgomery County, Maryland executive. She has, for many, many years in this field, provided a lot of strategy and advice and direction on a wide range of health and human services areas. She's also a fellow with the Center for the Study of Social Policy, where she advises on early childhood education systems. She used to be the deputy mayor for Health and Human Services for the government of the District of Columbia. And you'll remember in a previous webinar, we really talked about a lot of the advancements that the District of Columbia has made. Before that, she founded an organization called Central NIA, which is a nationally recognized program that serves about 1,200 children and families and she also was involved in starting a bilingual charter school and all kinds of multicultural, multilingual initiatives for children and families. So we're delighted to have her with her wealth of experience. We also have with us today Sharon Scott Chandler, who is the president and CEO of ABCD, that's Action for Boston Community Development. It's one of the largest community action agencies in the entire United States, having over a $200 million budget, serves more than 100,000 people every year in the greater Boston area. She used to be executive vice president of ABCD, where she was really instrumental in her leadership of Head Start, her leadership with Early Head Start, with many innovative youth development programs, and with the Child Care Resource and Referral Agency. She's an attorney that used to work in the Massachusetts Attorney's General office as well. And finally, we have with us a perspective that we haven't often talked about, but is critically important, even more so in this COVID era, and that is the whole after school programs as well as childcare and family childcare. And to represent that today, we have Ardith Weworka. Ardith is the executive vice president of a statewide organization in Massachusetts that provides educational services to children and families. In addition to that heavy role, she also, since 2014, has been serving as the chief executive officer of the Massachusetts After School Partnership. She has a very distinguished career in Massachusetts supporting programs. She used to be the commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care. And she states that her values are creativity, strategic planning, and day to day operations that's smart and practical as well as effective. So, all three of our panelists have a wide range of experiences and are well positioned to see what is happening in this COVID era for our early childhood and after school programs. So, we welcome them to share with us what they've learned, what they've seen, and what impact all of this is having on each and every one of us. As we listen to them today, I want you to recognize that this webinar is being recorded. It's being recorded because many of our colleagues are right now working with children and are not able to hear this live. We also make closed captioning available, and so please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen if you need to enable it. And we also encourage you to write in the chat because as we go along, we're going to be noticing your questions so that when we have a group discussion near the end of our webinar, we can try to address your questions. And once again, we invite you to click the link at the end of this webinar if you want to interact with our panelists. So, as everything we do, we base it on our knowledge base in our field. One of the things that tries to pull together our knowledge base of how we can be effective advocates is a book that CAYL produced called The New Early Childhood Professional. And that guides a lot of our programming in terms of thinking how we can make change and how we can be architects of that change. So, we recommend it to you. So now let's get started. Let's think about the impact of the COVID era on ECE programs. What's happening with the workforce? What's happening with the quality of our programs, not just the accessibility and the opening and the seats, but what's happening with quality? What's happening with the administrative leadership? Let's look at the big picture of some of the things that have happened in terms of the temporary financial resources that have been available, some of the policy changes that have been made available, some of which have been temporary, some of which we'd like to be permanent, and also just concerns for the staff who are working day to day with children. So now turn with me as we listen to our three panelists, Phoebe, Sharon, and Ardith, to share their insights with us as we go through today. So let me begin by welcoming Phoebe, who's going to be our first speaker. Phoebe, what is the impact of what's happening with children and families in our programs? Please share your insights with us.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to participate in what I hope is an opportunity to offer some food for thought on the current state of childcare in the U.S., especially now as we begin to come out of a pandemic and sort of have a chance to look at the impacts of the pandemic on our childcare work. Open any article in related to childcare, whether it's in a newspaper or a magazine or advocacy group or whoever, and the first line is bound to say childcare is in a crisis or the crisis of childcare. The childcare system is broken. It is amazing to me how that is top line now of so much of the conversation around childcare. Yet, all of us here today, as I look at who's joining us, all these educators and coaches and directors who are joining us today, know that the pandemic didn't cause the structural deficits and the issues faced by faced by the childcare system in the U.S. But the media has discovered it, government, many interest groups, they've certainly, the pandemic has really brought these issues to the forefront. And it's exposed the inequities in access, in affordability, in supply, in quality, in workforce conditions, all of those things that Laura has just mentioned. The pandemic has really lifted all those and has made them very, very, very visible. We can cite hundreds of reports over the years, and I'm sure all of you have had a chance to look at many of these and study many of these that have been sounding the alarm on issues such as workforce compensation and benefits. We know that's been top of line for conversation for a long time. The lack of access to higher education for our educators, the high cost of care for families, the lack of a public investment or sufficient public investment, and so on. These are all issues that all of us have faced throughout our careers as we manage programs, run programs, work on policy related to programs. But clearly, the pandemic has raised the concern about how important some of these issues are, and that we need to find solutions to them. And it wasn't long after the pandemic in 2020 that both families and local governments began to realize that our educators and the service they provide they're really essential workers, and they do essential work that without them, other essential workers would not be able to perform their duties. So I always say that we're double essential workers, right? Because so many essential workers depended on us being able to continue to provide those services during the pandemic, so that they could do the work. But in my recollection, in the many, many years of doing this work, this is the first time I really hear and have it expressed at the highest levels that we are really essential workers, and really important for this work to be more visible and for us to come to some national solution. In fact, in 2021, when Build Back Better was being debated, and I know all of us were so eager and counting that this would be the major shift in this country for our industry and for our work. But during that debate, the Department of Treasury put out a report. In that report, it basically said that having a well-functioning childcare sector is good for working families. It's good for children, and it's good for the rest of us. It's critical for the well-being of a functioning economy. I think that is a really powerful statement. It's critical for a well-functioning economy. The Department of Treasury of the United States in 2021 stated that childcare was a critical aspect of our economy. It also stated that the childcare system is unworkable in the way that it is currently structured. And it puts quality care out of the reach of many of our families. Parents struggle to pay, educators are paid low wages, and providers face very high turnovers. So again, I think it is really critical and important to note that at those levels of our federal government, we saw and we have the kinds of studies and the kind of work that acknowledges. But we also know that from acknowledging to actual action, and we saw this by the fact that we were unable to have Build Back Better go into law and be funded, that we still have ways to go. So, these were advocates and childcare community have been making the case for all of these for a long time, but Treasury making this comment, I thought was really was making the case for public investment at the highest levels of government. And so for me, it still gives me some hope that we will be able to move forward in some way for those public investments. But I want to take a couple minutes, and unfortunately, being probably the more negative part of all of this presentation, because I want to put in front of all of us what are some of these structural issues that our industry faces, or organizationally, and that were exacerbated by the pandemic. So again, not new, but certainly highlighted during the pandemic, and in many cases exacerbated by the pandemic. So what are some of these sort of top line structural issues facing us today? We hear that childcare is fragmented, that childcare is a business model that doesn't work, et cetera. And there's some very basic things that point to that, right? This is a $60 billion sector, $60 billion sector in this country, yet most providers have margins of less than 1%. So whether you are a nonprofit or a for-profit, your margins are so narrow that any shift in our business creates a huge impact in being able to manage and run your programs and your organizations. Labor costs for providers make anywhere between 60 and 80% of their budget, make up about 60 or 80% of their budget. By contrast, if you compare, and I don't like to compare it to the service industry, but if you compare to, for example, restaurant labor, a typical restaurant, 30% of their budget is dedicated to labor costs. So you can see where that the impact of labor costs on our industry currently as it's funded. We have regulatory systems that lack alignment and cohesion across jurisdictions, within a jurisdiction, across jurisdictions, or certainly across the country. And that really creates great fragmentation. Many of us who run multi-state organizations know how difficult it is to work from one jurisdiction to another, as these regulatory systems are so disaligned. And then partial investments or segmentation of early care and education in policy and investments also destabilizes. So funding pre-K rather than infants and toddlers, or home visiting and not some of the maternal care. All of the fragmentation of a system of care for young children pits one part of the system against another. All of these create a very fragmented industry. The other big headline on this, and we've all seen it, and now I think it is much more visible to the country in general, is the workforce shortage. So, and what creates that? Well, the average salary for a child care educator is about $24,000, probably less in some parts of the country. That's less than $12 an hour. And that results in about 15-20% of our workforce living under the poverty line in 41 of our states. I mean, just if you think about what that is, and these are the folks that are day in and day out working with our children and the educators of those very early years that we know are the most critical, yet their economic standing is at the bottom 2% of all professions in this country. And then, so the pandemic hits, and we know all of the conditions that led to closures, et cetera, and we are down about 100,000 workers within our field. So it's about a 10% decline pre-pandemic. So this is the Labor Department figures at this moment tell us that we are way behind in terms of being able to meet the needs of the workforce in childcare in order for parents to be able to access childcare. The next big structural area is cost. Right at this moment, generally parents are paying over 15% of their income in childcare. When we know that, and figures have told us, and Build Back Better built this in, that 7% is about as high as the parent of cost as parents can bear within their income. So that is creating significant workforce decisions for families, regardless of their income level. The other part around cost that I think is really significant is how does cost change with the changes of the type of care that parents are going to need as schedules change, as work schedules patterns change, and what does that mean as it relates to cost. Another a third or fourth structural issue is public investment, or the lack of public investment. So putting it in sort of larger context, the US spends about $500 per child in childcare. This is for toddlers annually, $500 annually, when we know that the true cost is somewhere between $14,000 for a little bit older children to $24,000 for an infant. And so you look at this, you know, how incongruent this is, where you have a public investment of $500 over a true cost of about $24,000. And there's no way that parents can make up that difference. The $40 billion that of pandemic relief stabilization funds out of the American Rescue Plan really provided a lifeline, but a very short lifeline for the industry in a very desperate moment. We appreciate it, but these funds will run out in September of 2024, and it will leave a very significant fiscal cliff of probably about $50 billion in the country. So that if between now and 25, we don't see some solutions in terms of public investments, the crisis we're talking about is going to continue. And the impact will fall again on the workforce, certainly on the children and on their families and the business in general. The pandemic created unparalleled need, an opportunity for reimagining what we need to do with childcare. And certainly we have to think about solutions, innovation in meeting some of the diverse needs of families and childcare. So that it will be, that's part of public investment. It will be really important for public investment in innovation and in solutions. So finally, I think I would say the other big structural piece is political will. And when we have needed it, we have had the political will, whether it's the Lanham Act in 1940, when we went into World War II, and you know, over 500,000 children were put directly into childcare so that their mothers could go to work. We know Head Start and what Head Start has done in terms of a major public investment. So we know that we can do this, and certainly in the investments that were done during the pandemic. So it's not unprecedented, but it really is a critical piece in terms of moving the country forward to ensure that all of our children get the quality care, that our workers get the pay that I always talk about pay parity in terms of public education, and that families have access to care as they need it, as their work schedules and all of our patterns of employment begin to change. So, apologize for the dim look, but we can look at a few bright spots across the country of things that are being done that others can emulate and be looking at. New Mexico, for example, has just put out a 1 year of free childcare for families under 400% of poverty. And that begins to set a pattern of, well, how do we make it affordable for families at that level of income? Vermont has passed their House Bill 171, that piece of legislation, which lays out a blueprint for universal childcare, not universal pre-K only, but universal childcare. DC, Washington, DC has the Pay Equity Fund and the healthcare for childcare. The revenue was raised through a wealth tax, and so that by 2025, there will be actual parity with public education. That means if you meet the same requirements as a public education teacher, you get the same pay, and you get no cost health insurance. So states beginning to use the cost of care as a way to set rates. So all of these are ways that we can begin to look at public investment in conjunction with the private sector. So the reality is that we need more diverse solutions. We need for the diversity of children and families that we have, and we need to support the industry as a whole. And I'll end with a statement by a teacher who says, I make $11 an hour and I'm exhausted. My credit cards are almost maxed out and my savings are dwindling. It's not looking good. I stay because I love the kiddos. It breaks my heart to think about having to find a new job. Thank you very much. Sharon, will you take it from here?
Okay, can you hear? I think you can hear me, right? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Bibi. And thank you, Valora. I'm so glad to be here. It's wonderful to be with everyone. I just want to acknowledge the incredible resilience, grace, and value that all of you, I know who are on this call, and that we bring to this work and to the field, working with children and families in our communities. And I think we all understand and know, some more deeply than others, how traumatizing the pandemic has been over the last 2.5 years. And in our programs, we lost staff, we lost loved ones, and the fear was always with us. And it continues to linger in many ways. But we are coming through it. And as Valora and Bibi have both mentioned, it is a moment to reflect and think about what we do now and how we do now. I'm going to touch on several areas that are really from the experience on the ground. Bibi talked about the structural issues, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the impacts that we've seen at ABCD. As Valora mentioned, we're a community action agency. We run a large early childhood program with Head Start programming throughout the greater Boston area, serving close to 2,000 children, have almost 600 staff, a variety of programming and childcare partners across our communities, engaged in the traditional Head Start part day, part year, full day, early childhood programming, et cetera. So we really run the gamut. And we did experience the gamut over the pandemic. The first thing Bibi already mentioned is staffing. And we knew and experienced prior to the pandemic that it was hard to recruit staff. But back then it was, and I say back then because it feels like a long time ago. Back then it was mostly about qualifications for us anyway. I mean, the Head Start regulations had come in, they had increased qualifications. And so we had people interested in the field, but we were thinking and always talking about, okay, well, does someone have an associate's degree? Does someone have a bachelor's degree? How do we get them more professional development? How do we get them the knowledge and the skills and the background to be, to have more quality programming in classrooms, et cetera? There was a lot more interest. I think now what we've seen and what we saw after the pandemic, I think it was incredible. Let me say this, it was incredible during the pandemic that we lost very few staff. Our staff were there. I mean, they knew it was a crisis. They knew our families needed us. They knew we needed each other. And we had not a lot of turnover, I think, during the pandemic, relatively speaking. I think it was after, as we came out of the pandemic and as it waned on, that we saw this crisis, as has been mentioned, that we've never seen before. And I think there's a couple of reasons. BB already alluded to the salaries in our field just do not compare. They don't compare to the public schools. They don't compare to restaurant industry. They don't compare to any really any other industry where you have to work as hard and give as much of yourself and your energy to a particular profession. But the other thing is, similar to other industries, the Great Resignation is happening in our programs as well. People are deciding they don't want to work. People are deciding, we've had a lot more retirements than we used to have. We still have a great group of folks who have been with us for many, many years, but that's, that's a place where we see happening more and more. More seasoned staff have decided to retire or leave our area. In the Boston area, it's incredibly expensive to live. So folks are saying, we're not going to do that commute anymore. We're not going to struggle anymore. And they're making those choices. So yeah, I think across our programs and across many programs that we know, at any one time, you can have a 20% vacancy rate, which is causing classroom closures. We've all seen it. We all know it. It exists, and families cannot access care. It's harder on our staff when we're juggling, folks who are in our family advocacy group are covering classrooms. We have directors covering classrooms. I mean, it's really putting a strain on not only everyday life, but the overall quality and access of our Head Start programs and our early childhood programming overall. So we're not all grim about that. We're in early childhood, we never give up, right? We work with children who are our future, so we'll never give up. And so we sometimes, we think about it as an opportunity to train and grow more talent into the field. We're working with youth. We're trying to encourage people to come into the field. There's an opportunity now as well to maximize the idea that BB talked about, that we have a recognition in the country of how important early childhood education is, both from a families getting to work and from a developmental standpoint. And so we're trying to use that. We're trying to look at ways to market and really attract more people, new people to the field as they look to what they're going to do next. And a lot of people are looking to do something that gives back. So we're looking at that. We're looking for more opportunity to have the field be a vital industry that has a robust workforce development program with career ladder, with jobs that pay good wages. And so, again, working with policymakers, working with funders to do more of that. The other thing we've done a bit more of, I think, is thinking innovatively about how we take care of our staff, how we put self-care as a critical component of the work we do. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we know people are getting burned out. We know they're not feeling validated. So as early childhood folks, we're used to taking care of everyone else and not ourselves. And it can't continue. And so we're saying, as a community, as programs, let's think of innovative ways to really put wellness and well-being at the center of our program, at the center of the activities that our staff can be engaged in, and also life supports, housing, financial literacy, things that our staff are in need of, that they're fending for themselves outside in the world. How can we help our staff do that? The other thing we saw a lot of, disconnect. So, whether it was you couldn't be in the classroom, you could only be one teacher in a classroom. There was you couldn't go back and forth in between different classrooms or travel around the program. Everybody had to be in their silos because of health and safety, because of COVID spread. So how do we reconnect with one another, both in our own individual programs, but also across the community. And one thing that I saw in our communities is that the early childhood programs came together. We leaned on each other at every level to see how we could be creative about dealing with the pandemic, how we could really get through this. So that kind of solidarity, I think, was new during the pandemic, or at least it had maybe waned a bit, and it certainly got energized because of the pandemic. The other thing we're experiencing on the ground level, and I know, Valoria, said your last webinar was on children. We see that every day, and it impacts how we do our work. We're now seeing, like the rest of the country and everywhere, young and old, we're dealing with mental health challenges and trauma from COVID, or trauma from not being with others. We see a tremendous amount of children coming into our care for the first time, and many have developmental or social delays. And that really puts a strain on the staff, and it also inhibits their growth in what we need to do that. And we've seen many more of those challenges in our preschool programs and our infant and toddler programs. In one of our locations, we have 4 children suspected of being on the autism spectrum who have not been diagnosed. 4 in one program. That's really unheard of. So there's really clearly an opportunity to have us, or a mandate for us, to really focus on children's social and emotional well-being, especially at the youngest ages, and really devoting more resources to that particular aspect of child development right now. We've over the years, we've argued back and forth about, social, emotional, academic, this, that. We know that right now, children's social, emotional have to be on the top of our agendas. I think families as well. Families during that time feared for their own health and safety, weren't able to work until our programs got up and running. And once they did start to come back, they weren't able to come in the classrooms themselves. They had to drop the kids off at the front door, juggling multiple kids in school and at home and trying to drop off. And so there's been a disconnect, I think, with programs and families that needs to be reconnected, that needs to be repaired. And so as we try to think about innovative ways to engage them, those are the things that we're thinking about moving forward. We know the mask itself has created a certain barrier. And so breaking down those walls, I think, is something we need to concentrate on as we move forward. Finally, not finally, I got a couple of other things that were positives during this experience. And one, I think, was with our facilities, because many programs had the resources to do some long overdue improvements that we didn't have before. Now, it caused a pandemic, took a pandemic to get us the resources, but putting in bathrooms, upgrading HVAC systems, redoing outdoor spaces, in some cases, moving out of buildings. And that never has happened so quickly and with such urgency than over those last 2.5 years, without having to take out a huge loan or something like that. The other piece that we saw differently and see differently than we did before the pandemic is technology. So many of us had laptops or cell phones to help us do our jobs. A little bit different for teachers in the classroom, but in some instances, where there was virtual learning that had to go on in the early days, or even home visiting and the like, there's a whole area of technology that we experienced. And that's going to be something that we can take into the future. The rest of the world is really, ahead of the early childhood field in that space, and we don't want the gap to continue to grow. Compensation as well, and Bibi mentioned, obviously, what we're looking for is long-term salary improvements. But I will say that this was the first time ever, I've been in our organization for 23 years, that we were able to give our staff something. We were able to, whether you called it hazard pay or whether you called it retention and recruitment bonus or whatever it was, We've never been able to say, here is money to thank you, to say we see you, to help you. We know you are struggling. So as we continue to really work towards better compensation overall, we were able to do that. And that goes a long way, I think, for people. So I think that, you know, there's so much reason to be optimistic, and I could go on and on and on talking about the things that we experience really at the ground level and how that impacts the bigger picture. But I know that that we're going to move on to our next speaker. So Bibi also mentioned the Build Back Better legislation, which we were all hopeful for. The one thing that I can say is we did see a huge change in that political will for early childhood programming, but we must not rest. We must not take anything for granted. I think we need to stay loud and proud because as we saw with the Build Back Better legislation, other issues, very important issues, trumped the early childhood pieces to that legislation. And so we have to stay vigilant about what we need as a field and at the ground level, that keeping our foot to the pedal to the metal in terms of our vigilance, encouraging political will. So I'd like to turn it over to Ardith. Sorry, I took too much time.
So you're all wondering what is left to be said. So I'm in the unique position of having two jobs that I really love. One is supporting 800 family child care educators in Massachusetts through a particular support agency. And the other job is as CEO of the Massachusetts After School Partnership, providing support to the after school and summer learning field in Massachusetts. So I'm very familiar with family child care and after school. And I could say every educator's experience with the pandemic has a lot of overlap in terms of challenges, in terms of traumas. But I also think there's overlap in the positives, which is where I want to start. So let's begin with the public perception of childcare. Across the board, our field has struggled with convincing the world that this is a profession and a worthy profession, that it provides an important and valuable, critical contribution to our society. And although we all know that, I think Bibi said, you know, all of a sudden the media discovered us during the pandemic. And I think that is a good thing. We have a lot of heroes in our midst, and we need to celebrate them. And if the media now wants to celebrate them, I think that is a wonderful thing. So it's been said that hard times don't create heroes. It's during hard times when the hero within us is revealed. And I think every educator across the country who went through the pandemic on the ground can lay claim to being that hero and having that hero in them revealed. And that public perception, that fuels all that other stuff. You know, is the infrastructure there? Will public policy support us? Is there public will? That perception has to come first, and I think it's here now. The second positive is that there was a recognition, at least in Massachusetts, that without serious intervention, that our current system was really about to fall apart. And I have to say, there, you know, we always, I worked in government. I know the good parts. I know the weak parts. It's easy to kind of complain about government a lot, but our government here in Massachusetts did a pretty good job of providing that immediate intervention. And I think it was a big positive. Our licensing agency created what they called a COVID playbook. Now, everything was changed in the beginning, you know, that first month, March of 2020, COVID was a death sentence. in everyone's mind. And so coming up with policies that made sense in childcare settings, that was a hard thing to do. And they did it. And they provided funding for programs even when programs were closed because of the pandemic, and created through the process something called stabilization grants, which continue to be provided today, which just essentially provided extra income for programs to use to face the challenges that the pandemic caused. And you would say, well, that's kind of like one time, so that's not going to matter so much. And it's one time now, but it creates a pattern and something that we can advocate for to continue. And how does that make a difference? In our family childcare program, we could have one family childcare educator taking care of 6 kids and making $40,000 a year. Those stabilization grants right now are providing that educator an additional $3,000 a month. So essentially, her income has doubled since those stabilization grants were instituted. Now, will they continue? I sat on the Early Childhood Economic Review Commission, where there was tremendous interest in continuing stabilization grants. They've been continued by the legislature once. And oftentimes when the legislature does something once, they see the value in it, and it may continue. So I see that as a positive. The other positive I see was that there have been several legislative initiatives that were prompted by the pandemic. There was the notion that reimbursing programs by attendance was never a good reimbursement model, right? Because kids don't show up, then you don't get paid, but your fixed costs remain the same, right? Your rent is the same, your payroll is the same. Everything is the same, except the children aren't there. So we've had some serious conversation in Massachusetts. I know that many of you on this call are not from Massachusetts, but it's a model to start considering reimbursement for childcare, not by attendance, but by enrollment. And that would make a huge difference. And it's something people are seriously talking about now. In Massachusetts, also, the legislature established a trust fund for childcare. They're so invested now in thinking about it. They established a trust fund and getting ready to put a bunch of money in, and they don't even have written out what it's supposed to do. But there's enough of a, we know this is a crisis kind of attitude that we're trying to do everything we can to make this be better. And this past year, of course, or maybe not of course, but in Massachusetts, of course, they increased a regular reimbursement, even based on the old system. And the fourth positive I see was the increase in federal spending for childcare. Through the American Rescue Plan and some of the ESSER funds, the federal government put in $53 billion with a B, dollars into the childcare system across the country. And I understand, you could say that's one time, it creates a cliff, and those things are true. But what also is true is that those investments went directly into programs to help solidify the programs, to help improve them, to increase reimbursement for staff, to do the things that were needed to be done to create a rescue plan that actually worked. And whether that will continue, again, once Congress does something one time, there's the potential that they will continue that. Now, a lot of things depend on our midterms, but I see we could look at it the other way. What if they didn't do that? Where would we be now? So there are a lot of like-minded people in Congress who understand the importance of those investments and those supports. So those are some of the positives, but I also know there are challenges, and that our field has been tested, and that there are lasting impacts from the pandemic. I like the attitude of, though, you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. And I think that fairly represents our field. There were many similarities across all prototypes, after school, family childcare, early childhood, Head Start, similarities in the effect of the pandemic. I mean, the first one is just having the courage to keep programs open. And especially in family childcare, where the childcare setting is your own home. You're inviting outside people. You don't know where they've been, who they've been with, anything really. And you're inviting them into your home where your family is. And that took a lot of courage for programs to stay open to do that. And they did that. Right now, we have over 1 million deaths in the United States from COVID and continue to have hospitalizations and deaths today. So we are, beyond mask mandates and that sort of thing, but it continues. And so I still think it is a similarity across all prototypes that courage remains, front and center. Sharon did a great job talking about the, sort of on the ground problems, how do you keep kids distant? Although state government did great in some ways, in other ways, different agencies had different policies. So, elementary and secondary ed said you can keep kids 3 feet apart in school. Early education and care said they have to be 6 feet apart in childcare. It was confusing. And that was not a good part of what government did. But the burnout of staff, the taking on of entirely new tasks for educators, doing testing, how to use the personal protective equipment, how to keep up with health and safety protocols, all of those challenges, similar and met across the board. Unique to after school and family childcare, and I'll end on this. For after school, when schools were closed, it was the after school professional that took on the task of managing remote learning. First, just getting curriculum when there was no remote learning when schools first closed. But then when schools were closed and they put together a Zoom remote learning protocol, it wasn't, especially for first responders, it wasn't mom and dad who were doing the remote learning. In many cases, it was the after school program. And so, teaching a 5-year-old how to open a Chromebook or to remember the 5-year-old's password. How many of you can remember your passwords? So it was a big challenge. And, guiding the 8-year-old not to write the word poop in the chat. These are things that were real and that were happening. And after school professionals took on that mantle of, I'm now the teacher. I have to be the teacher. And they did an awesome job in doing that. For family childcare, because their margins are particularly small because they don't typically have a large number of kids, they ended up taking fewer kids because the home setting was not conducive to being able to separate children 6 feet. Licensing would license somebody's living room to be the family childcare space. And if that was the family childcare space, there was no way to have 6 kids and have them be 6 feet apart. So there was a lot of loss of funding that then the state picked up. So I'm going to end there and say there's certainly enough challenge to go around, but on balance, I think our educator heroes have prevailed. Thank you.
Wow, I am so full with everything that I've just heard. I'm really appreciate everyone, Sharon, BB, and Ardith, for really letting us know what great things that came out of COVID in terms of our ability to move forward, our ability to advocate, our ability to really advance the profession of early childhood education on the heels of some of the policy changes and advances that happened under COVID. That's what we must look forward to. I am very sorry that a lot of our time is running out because we promised to keep this to an hour. But I want to encourage each and every one of you to click the link that you're going to see in the chat momentarily. If you click that link, it's going to take us to a Zoom meeting where you can interact with our panelists and ask the questions that are on your mind. So please click the link and join us. And let's continue this dialogue. I know there were some questions that some people had for clarity, questions that people have been texting me about. Please join us by clicking the link and we'll be able to have a dialogue. Thank you so much, BB and Sharon and Ardith, for your very provocative, very informative comments here today. And thank you. And let's all keep working optimistically for our children and families and for the profession of early childhood education. Good night. I'll see you in the Zoom meeting. Bye-bye.